Hello everyone, this is Mr. Bal and you're watching my YouTube channel Mr. Bal's English Lessons. This is video number 5 for the seconde, and today we are going to talk about Forrest Gump in Vietnam. So you normally had to watch the extract. I had given you the link on a Google Drive so that you can watch it because I wasn't able to put it on YouTube. And so while watching this video, you had to fill in a 3 pages file, a 3 pages worksheet. You had the first one right there where you had lots of questions, and first you had to take some notes. Here is the second page, and on the second page you had to do exactly the same thing. And once you had finished taking all the notes, whether in English or in French, you had to write full sentences, full answers for all these questions in order to get the main information and the basic events that happened in that extract. So you had also that third page where you had some pictures, and we're going to come back on this a bit later, and a short text over here that you had to read in order to know more about this war called the Vietnam War. Right, so let's start with the correction of this worksheet. At any time you can press pause if you want to take the correction. Of course, the goal is not to write all the answers right now. It is to correct what you have written, which means if you have missed, for example, some elements, you may just add them to your answer. It's not necessary, and I don't want you to erase all your answers and rewrite the correction. The thing is, you need to compare what you have written and what was expected. So this is a correction. It's not the best or the perfect version of what you could have done, but at least you have the main events. So it's only a correction, and take it as it. Right now, so answer the following questions while watching the extract on Forrest Gump in Vietnam. So let's go ahead with the very first question. You have the beginning. So at the beginning, when was Forrest Gump enrolled in the army? How and why? So Forrest Gump got enrolled when he graduated from the University of Alabama. So you can see that he received his diploma. As he didn't know what to do after 4 years at the university, because he's been mainly playing football, and a soldier, or you could have said an officer in uniform, was here to recruit young people. And he had a flyer, or you can call it a leaflet, a brochure with Uncle Sam on it. And so here it is to convince people who don't know what to do, especially after university, to enroll in the army and serve their country. Okay, so basically this is how he got there, and he didn't know what to do. Most of the people living university in the US don't know what to do, and sometimes, well, army looks like a good solution. Right, let's move on to question 2. Now it's inside the bus. So I told you that this question, unless you had already watched the film, you couldn't really answer it. But as I'm going to ask you a bit later to watch the full movie if you're able to do it, well, you're going to see that some extracts, some scenes from the film, they look like each other. So it is important to mention them. So look at the scene in the bus. What does it remind you of, and who does he meet there? So basically, it reminds us of the beginning of the film. So in the school bus, when you have Forrest Gump as a young kid, and the first time he meets Jenny, you can see them inside the school bus, and everyone rejects Forrest Gump because he's got problems to his legs and because he looks different. So all the other boys, all the other children are rejecting him except Jenny. She's the only one to accept him, and he's able to sit next to her. And so here he meets Boba exactly in the same circumstances. He's going to be his best friend, and they have a conversation about shrimps. We can see that Boba is very keen on shrimps. But here there is a parallel between the scene in the school bus and this scene in the bus to the army, because Boba is the only one to accept Forrest Gump, and he asks him to sit next to him. Right, the training camp. So as a young soldier, Forrest Gump needs to train a bit because he doesn't really know how to perform in the army. So he needs to learn a few things, and the first thing before being sent to war is the training camp. So how good is Forrest while training, and what does the surgeon tell him? You've got a very long passage, okay, in which Forrest is training, and at one moment you can see the surgeon is always yelling at the soldiers. He's shouting on them, especially on Forrest Gump, but you need to understand what he said. So, what we can say is that Forrest is excellent at training, because in the army he doesn't have to think, he just needs to obey the orders. So, the surgeon tells him he has good, outstanding answers. We can see that he does and he undoes his rifle very quickly. So here the surgeon tells him that he is a genius with an IQ of over 160, that he is gifted, that he has set a new record in the company for doing and undoing his rifle, and one day he will end up being a general. So Forrest Gump is really talented in the army. So here it is pretty strange, considering the fact that we know that Forrest Gump has a low IQ, that he's got problems understanding others. He's not really intelligent, okay? But here in the army, he looks like a genius, right? So this is pretty funny. Let's move on to question 4. And question 4 is while on the leave on the furlough before. The leave or the furlough, if I may explain it again, is the time when soldiers can go back home or do anything they like. They can go out of the training camp. They are free, okay? So this is what it means. So who does he meet while on the leave, and what happens? So he meets Jenny, who plays the guitar naked in a pub, a theater, a club in Memphis. Here, Forrest Gump doesn't really understand what's happening there. He thinks that Jenny has fulfilled her dreams, that she is now a folk singer, but in fact she's just in a kind of club, okay, where singers, especially women, perform naked. So it's almost like a strip club, but he doesn't really understand that. He wants to rescue and he wants to save her because she's kind of attacked or provoked by some customers from the bar. And she leaves, okay? She doesn't want him to take care of her. And before leaving, Forrest is telling her he needs to go to Vietnam. He's going to Vietnam. He's being sent to Vietnam. And she asks Forrest not to be brave. And she gives him one piece of advice: run in case of danger. And then she leaves once more. And this leads us to question 5. What does he do just before leaving for Vietnam? Well, simply he goes to his mom's house in Greenbow to tell her goodbye. Okay, he's going to say his mom goodbye. And kind of the same piece of advice, his mom told him, and she wants him to take care of him. Okay, so this is what happens just before leaving for Vietnam. Now, in Vietnam, you have seen the extract. You have different scenes in this extract, and all the scenes are pretty different because they show you one aspect of the war in Vietnam, and the atmosphere is rather different through the whole extract. Sometimes, it's pretty bad because you have some scenes of war, wounded soldiers and shots and so on, and sometimes people seem to have fun, and this is what we're going to see right now. Can you give some elements and explain how is the young soldiers' arrival in Vietnam? First of all, we can say they arrived by helicopter. This was the main mean of transport in Vietnam. Okay, helicopter was used a lot, especially by the Americans. Here they are welcomed by Lieutenant Dan, and Lieutenant Dan shows them what life is on the camp, what life is like on the camp or on the platoon. They call it a platoon. So here it's pretty strange. We would expect the soldiers to be very serious and to be ready to fight. But it's the total opposite, because soldiers are drinking beers, they are smoking cigars or cigarettes, they are eating a barbecue, so you can see they are cooking things on the barbecue. They are playing cards, so playing poker and other games, and they are listening to music. So in fact we can say that this camp, this platoon, does not look like a military camp, but it looks like a leisure camp, a leisure center, or even a camping site, because all these activities, well, you can do them on the camping site. But here the two recruits, Forrest and Boba, are very impressed and they are very shy, and you can see that Dan is making fun of them. I don't want to explain everything, but for example, because they answer at the same time and they say they come from Alabama, Lieutenant Dan says, "Are you twins?" Which is of course not possible, but they do answer very seriously and they do not seem to understand the joke. And then Lieutenant Dan makes fun of Boba because he's got big lips, as Boba puts it, he's got big gums. And so Lieutenant Dan says, "Okay, you'd better not walk on your gums and fall." So that is pretty funny. Right, we can move on to question 7. What do they do all day long, and how is the weather? When they are not on the platoon, on the camping site, they are, well, outside, and all day long they all walk for hours, and they're looking for a guy named Charlie. Well, Forrest Gump does not understand what this means, but Charlie is a code name to mention enemy soldiers. So in fact they are looking for North Vietnamese people, but Forrest Gump believes that they are looking for someone called Charlie. So it is pretty funny too this time. And how is the weather? Well, the weather is nice, okay? At the beginning it's really hot, it's really sunny. You can see the soldiers, they're wearing t-shirts. And one day it began to rain and it lasted for 4 months. And here this is what we call the period of the monsoon. The monsoon is a time, especially in the southern hemisphere, where the rain just goes on every day and for 4 months. And after the monsoon, it helps make the vegetation grow, and so the people can just harvest afterwards. So this is what we can say about question 7. And now we're moving to question 8. So question 8 is about the fighting scene. So look at the fighting scene and give as many elements as you can to describe it. Because remember, it's raining all the time, and one day, as Forrest Gump puts it, somebody turned off the rain and the sun came out again, and this is when you have this fighting scene. So among all the elements you could have taken, you could have found, you can say that there are lots of explosions, there are lots of noise, lots of machine guns and bullets shot. The people, the soldiers, they're crying, they're shouting, they're screaming. You've got lots of them that are whether wounded, injured or hurt, and some others are dead. What we can say about this fighting scene is that it's a complete mess, a complete massacre. And we're going to come back on this later when we're going to correct the different pictures. Here, one thing that is very typical of this war in Vietnam is that you can't see the enemy soldiers. Really, you can see shots, but you can't see the enemy soldiers. Okay, and this was very typical from the war in Vietnam, especially when the people were fighting, when the soldiers were fighting in the jungle. Question 9. After running out of the forest, Okay, remember Forrest has decided to follow Jenny's piece of advice. What does Forrest decide to do? So he decides to return, to go back in the forest in order to save or to rescue his friends, especially Boba. He wants to find Boba. So he's going to go back in the forest. Question 10. What happens at the end of the scene? Well, at the end of the scene, after saving lots and lots of his friend soldiers, Forrest Gump rescues Boba. But Boba dies in his arms, and planes are spraying napalm all over the forest. And Forrest has lost his one and only friend. He has rescued, I don't remember exactly, 4 or 5 friend soldiers, including Lieutenant Dan. He finally found Boba, but Boba is very badly hurt, and he dies in his arms. That leads us to question 11. And question 11 is at the nursery. So Forrest Gump has been wounded, okay? He has received a bullet in the buttocks, the bottom, okay? Which means, well, at his back, lower back, if I can say so. And so, how does Forrest feel? And who does he meet? What happened to him? The thing is, you may expect Forrest to be very sad, okay? Desperate, exhausted, tired, well, because of everything he has experienced, and because, well, he has lost his best friend, because he has seen people dying, because he was hurt, okay, he was shot in the buttocks, so you may feel, well, you may think that Forrest Gump is going to feel very bad, but on the contrary, and very surprisingly, he feels fine. Because he can eat lots of ice cream. He can eat all the ice creams he wants. And this is what makes him very happy. Remember, he's got a childish attitude. And so who does he meet? He meets Dan, Lieutenant Dan, the one that he has rescued. And what we know is that Dan had his legs cut. He lost his legs. He was amputated. Okay? And, well, Lieutenant Dan is not in the mood to speak to Forrest Gump. Question 12 is, what does Forrest receive and what does it mean? So just after this, Forrest Gump receives all the letters he wrote Jenny. If you can see on the letters, there is a finger indicated that the address was unknown and that no one lived on that address, and so the letters were simply returned to the one who had written them. And so Forrest Gump had written lots and lots of letters to Jenny, but she never got them. So here, this means that Jenny never got his letters, and maybe she ignores him. Okay, this is what he may think. In reality, she is with the hippies now, and she has no fixed address as she travels with them. Remember, she's with the hippies, and so she's going all around the US, traveling, playing the music, experiencing new things. But we'll come back on another document. We'll come back on the hippies. And so she has no fixed address, so you can't write a letter to someone who has no address. And this was the only way to communicate back then. Question 13. What does he start doing all the time? So basically, he starts playing ping pong all the time. He discovers that sports, and so he starts playing it all the time. As it is not difficult, there is one thing to do. Just follow the ball with your eyes. He's pretty good at it. And so what happened on one day, and can you explain what's happening in the scene? This is his very last days, or the very last day at the nursery. And here one day, he got a letter saying that he could come back to the USA and he would be awarded a Medal of Honor by the President. He also learned that Dan was sent back home, and so here, overall, what does that mean? It means that Forrest Gump is going to go back to the US. The Vietnam War is over for him. And so, the return, how is it like? What happens to him first when he comes back to Washington? Explain. So, as he received the letter, the very first thing that happened to him is he goes to the White House. He's received by the President of the USA, that was Lyndon B. Johnson by that time. And what happened? What happens? So here the President asks him where he was wounded. But he tells him that, well, just to be polite, okay? And he tells him he'd like to see that. That is not in the real meaning of it, in the real sense of it. It is figurative. So he says that, right, that's incredible to see a wound, okay? And here Forrest Gump says that he was wounded at his buttocks, at his bottom. And as the President told him that he would like to see that, well, he just shows his buttocks, his bottom, in front of the cameras. Okay, so all the TVs were able to see Forrest Gump's buttocks in front of the televisions. But this time again, just because he doesn't understand the second meaning to the words. And the very last question to that worksheet is, where is he accidentally taken? And can you explain this final scene? So he's accidentally taken in a demonstration for pacifism led by students and hippies. In fact, he's dressed as a soldier. The hippies and the students are dressed as soldiers. And, well, he's mistakenly taken for a protesting student or a protesting hippie. And so he needs to go on stage. He's taken on stage. He has to introduce himself, but he also has to talk about the war in Vietnam. Well, you can see that there is a policeman or a member from the army that is just removing all the wires, and so we can't hear, nobody can hear what he says except the people on stage. And when the sound comes back, Forrest Gump has finished his speech. So again, that is pretty funny. But here, well, you can see that he's back in the US, and you can see everything that is happening. Okay, we're going to come back on the different events and what was typical of the war in Vietnam. So look at the different scenes taken from the extract you've just seen, and write under each picture what was typical of the war in Vietnam. So, number one, the training camp. Because you're being recruited after your studies, you need to train before being sent to war. The thing is, at the training camp, you learn things like doing and undoing your weapon very quickly. You can see that they're doing lots of things like cleaning the bedrooms with a toothbrush. You can see that they're doing lots of things at the training camp. But the thing is, it's pretty quick, and we can't really say that these people are prepared. And this is what is going to be problematic. Second thing, the arrival. The arrival, so you can see the two recruits. You've got Forrest and Boba. They arrive by helicopter, and we're going to mention this afterwards. And they arrive in a place they don't know, and most of the people who came to Vietnam had never left the United States before, and sometimes they had never left their own city. Okay, so they didn't know what was happening outside. So it was a total discovery, and they were quite impressed. Here you've got the platoon. The platoon here, you can see in the back all the helicopters. You could have written the helicopters, but this is the platoon, so the camp where all the soldiers are. And here, as we already said, it looks like a leisure camp. Just have a look at those soldiers. They're not really ready for war right there. They're just having fun. They're playing cards for the one right there, cooking a barbecue. There are some that were drinking beer. You've got open air toilets. It really looks like a camping site. Here, typical of the war in Vietnam too, the invisible enemy. Just have a look. You can see the American soldiers right there, but not the other enemies. The only thing you can see are the different shots and the explosions. So here, that was very typical. The Vietnamese people, they knew their territory pretty well. They knew how to hide in the in the different forests, in the jungles, and so it was very difficult for the Americans to see them, and they were nearly invisible. You've got also fighting in the middle of civilians. Here there is a rice field, okay, you can see explosions in the back. In this rice field, you've got people, Vietnamese people, that are just cultivating and harvesting the rice. And you've got the American soldiers in between. So here they were fighting in the middle of civilians. It means that lots of Vietnamese civilians were killed during that war. You've got the hot and humid climate. Okay, here you can see that this is the period of the monsoon. It is very wet, it's raining all the time and raining a lot. Here people are in the water, and one piece of advice that Lieutenant Dan has given to his recruits when they arrived on the platoon, it was to take care of their feet. One reason for that is if your feet are not dry, well, your skin may go off, and well, your flesh may rot, and so you may lose your legs because of that. Well, and as we see later, well, Lieutenant Dan is the one who lost his legs. You've got the tunnel rats. At one moment you can see that there is a bomb exploding in a kind of tunnel, in a kind of nest, if we can say so. And Forrest Gump is sent with a weapon to have a look inside it. Why? Just because, well, these tunnels, they were made by animals from the forest. But the Vietnamese people, North Vietnamese people, they knew that those tunnels existed. And they were hiding in those tunnels in order to take the American soldiers by surprise. And so one thing was, when they saw those tunnels, they were sending American soldiers inside to verify if there were any enemy soldiers inside. And these soldiers that had to do that task were called the tunnel rats. Then you have the use of napalm. Because the Vietnamese soldiers could hide in the forest and you could not see them, one way was to spray napalm all over the forest. And this product, when it is sent on vegetation, when it is spread on vegetation, simply it burns. And so here, well, lots of hectares of forest were burnt by the Americans, and it killed not only enemy soldiers, but also civilians that were hiding in the jungle, and lots of animals too, and sometimes even American soldiers. Next thing we can mention is the difficult return and the Pacific demonstrations. When the American soldiers came back from Vietnam, they were not really welcome back to the country, because lots of people were yelling at them, shouting on them, telling that they were monsters, that they were killers. And you had not any kind of support from the population towards the what we call veterans, which means people coming back from the army. And so it was really difficult for them because you had lots of pacific demonstrations, especially by hippies and also by students. Okay, because the students didn't want to go to the war. They were the first one to be sent, and lots of people, lots of soldiers who were sent to the Vietnam War, they were really, really young. So here, this is the little text that you had to read, and I'm going to read it right there, try to explain you a few things. So the Vietnam War occurred during the Cold War period from November the 1st, 1955 to April the 30th, 1975, and it was fought between North Vietnam, supported by the USSR, China, etc., so the Communist bloc, and the government of South Vietnam, supported by the USA, so the Western Bloc, though the USA did act alone there. Basically, before, Vietnam was called Indochina, and it was a French colony. But because the French had lots of problems during the Second World War, the USA, well, wanted to install themselves there because there was the threat of the USSR spreading its power in that part of the world. So the US military involvement ended on August the 15th, 1973, which means a bit less than 2 years before the official end of the war, which led gradually to the end of the war, symbolized by the capture of Saigon by the North Vietnamese Army in April 1975. North and South Vietnam were reunified the following year. So in this war, you have 58,222 American soldiers that were killed. That is enormous. More than 150,000 that were wounded, and at least 21,000 that were permanently disabled. The average age of the US troops killed was 23 years old, so they were really young. And here, approximately 830,000 Vietnam veterans, so you can see that lots of people were sent there, suffered some degree of post-traumatic stress disorder, and as a consequence their return to the USA was often very difficult. Difficult because of the protests, because they were rejected by others, because they were not helped by the army. As soon as they came back from the army, well, they lost their job. They were not soldiers anymore, and so they had to do everything by themselves, find a new job and so on, and it was really difficult, especially when you have done the war just after, when you have made the war just after your studies. Okay, you do not have any professional experience. So here it was very difficult, and because of the horrors they had seen during the war, it was even more difficult for them. So Forrest Gump is not the only film in which you can see what the war in Vietnam was like. You've got, for example, Platoon, okay, so telling you life on the camp and, well, on the battlefield. Full Metal Jacket by Stanley Kubrick, and First Blood, featuring Rambo, and we know that film under the title of Rambo the First. I'm just going to tell a few words. Rambo, what is it basically? It's the story, well, here you have the film poster. Here, it's the story of a war veteran coming back to the USA. He is on foot, so he's walking through the cities. And the thing is, he's rejected by the people inside the city, and especially the city's sheriff officer. And the thing is, he's badly treated, and because he's badly treated by those officers, well, he managed to escape from the prison, from the sheriff's office, and he decides to make war to them because this is the only thing he knows. And basically this ends up in Rambo killing lots of people, lots of policemen, and making war to those. The only thing that can stop him is his boss, okay? But basically this is what the film is about. Afterwards, Rambo, the second episode, the third episode, you've got also John Rambo and Rambo Last Blood. It's, well, mainly making war and killing lots of people, but not for the same reason. And the very first film was focusing on the post-traumatic stress disorder of the soldiers and the fact that they were not welcome when coming back home. But you can watch that movie, especially the first one. It's a pretty good one, and you can see how people coming back from Vietnam were. So as always, you can check everything on Pronote. You will have the future activities that will be put, so please take the PDF documents. There is no lesson for this one because it was the correction of all the questions that you had. So now you have a knowledge about it. So, well, just stay focused on your work. I know it's pretty difficult for some of you. I hope everyone is doing it. For those who are doing it seriously, well, congratulations, because I know it's pretty difficult. So always check your ENT, your Pronote. don't miss the virtual classes. Prepare questions for the virtual classes, because this is what it is supposed to do. And please, questions not just on practical things, but on the lesson itself. Okay, I want to make sure that you all understand this, because when we are going to see each other again, well, you may have some tests. I want to see if you have the knowledge and if you have done the work during that strange period. Right, this video is now over, so please do the work seriously. And well, I'll be soon back. There will soon be a new video on your lessons. And well, try to make the best of your days. Try to relax also. So not just relaxing, but working. Well, take care of you all, and see you very soon. Goodbye.